Welcome to our podcast, Talk to Me, Sister. I'm Cathey.
And I am Sarah, and we are twin sisters documenting our surrogacy journey, discussing women's health, motherhood, and all the details that led us here.
Our mission is to not only educate and inform, but to spread joy and hope through our story. Thanks for following along.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. We are on episode number 2 of our podcast, Talk to Me, Sister. Today we are discussing all things surrogacy, which is talking about how I made the decision to use Cathey as my surrogate, how my experience was talking to an agency, how Cathey felt called and ready to be my surrogate, etc.
Yeah, we're excited.
We're so excited.
It's a lot of information, so I do think this would be great for people who know us, but also those who are interested in being a surrogate or being an intended parent.
And really quick, for people who are just tuning in and skipped the intro, you're my surrogate and you're my twin sister.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's so freaking wild.
Yes.
I'm so excited.
So we are going to go into some of the details. It was about a 2-year conversation and about a year-long process of, the start to finish. Start to finish is in, like, the transfer and all that. So,
this past Wednesday, we had our second ultrasound.
We did. Everything looks really good.
He looks
We're so
cute,
happy.
and he's tripled in size, which is wild.
Yeah, in 2 weeks, he got 3 times bigger, which makes sense why it's been difficult.
You're hungry and you've been nauseous.
Hungry and tired.
But he's tripled in size. Last time, the first ultrasound, he was the size of a blueberry, and now you can see his arms and his legs, and he did a little wiggle for us. So
he's like a gummy bear now.
We're officially released from Nashville Fertility, and we are officially OB patients starting February 3rd. So that's
we
graduated.
We graduated from our fertility clinic, which is just, if anybody walks this journey, that's a huge deal, because we've had so many appointments there and so much unexpected and unknowns. So it's a really big deal to graduate from there. And on Wednesday, in a couple days, I'll be 10 weeks, and I get to start weaning off of my extra hormones.
I'm so glad you get to do that.
Me too.
I feel like that's part of the reason that you've been so sick.
Yeah, I think so. I don't quite feel myself on all the hormones. And just shout out to IVF warriors out there who have to do this, because I did the light version. I'm only taking estrogen by mouth and progesterone suppositories, and those are the only 2 things I'm taking. And
I follow a girl on Instagram who's doing IVF right now, and she just posted a picture where she's holding up 2 like Ziploc gallon bags of shots.
I know, yeah.
And she said like #20 weeks, here we go. And I was like, I'm so glad that you don't have to do 20 weeks of shots.
Me too. So we're just shouting out to all the people who have to, because I feel so. It's draining. It's draining. There's some brutal parts of the day-to-day, the doing it every day, and I am taking a lot of pills. I'm taking a lot of supplements, which I want to.
That's on you, though.
That's
they
on
didn't
me.
Tell you to.
Yeah. So anyway, I am excited for that milestone. I really am. So I did want to point out before we get started, Sarah and I have some questions we're going to ask each other that we have gotten that are kind of common questions that people ask when we tell them about this process, but I actually wanted to point out the difference between a gestational carrier and a surrogate, because we use the word surrogate. A lot of people use that word for what I'm doing for you, which is carrying your baby. But I'm actually technically your gestational carrier.
This is not your biological baby mixed with Richard's sperm.
Right. Yeah.
This is my egg and Richard's sperm.
Right. So a traditional surrogate is someone who is related to their baby but is not keeping it. I guess that's the way to say it. They're more or less egg donors, traditional surrogates, which is wild. It's rare, but they still do it.
I mean, I feel like that would be so hard as a surrogate, because it's really like your child. Like, did you see Little Fires Everywhere?
It's like that. Yeah, she's a traditional surrogate.
Yeah, and she realized it was her baby, and she loved it, and she took off,
hard.
and no one ever heard from her again.
It would be hard, but some incredible women do it.
I know, it's wild.
It's some incredible women do it. It's like being an egg donor. So that's not me. I'm technically a gestational carrier, but even in the world of surrogacy and IVF and gestation, we use the word surrogate just, as what I'm doing as well as a gestational carrier. Yeah. So we wanted to clarify that this embryo was made in a lab with part of Sarah and part of Richard and was put in me, and I am a carrier. And we did talk about it, like, when we were exploring all this. We were like, man, it would be cheaper for us just to do IUI or something, right? And then I was like, wait, then I think I would be we were like, oh yeah, that would be hard.
Richard was like, yeah, I'm not really into that.
And I said
a little bit too close to home. I mean, Cathey's like my sister, but that would be a little weird.
And of course we wanted your genes and all that good stuff. So I did want to clarify that, and let's get into it. So I'm going to ask Sarah a couple questions, and then she'll ask me a few, and we hope it clarifies some things for you guys. So Sarah is the intended parent, and Sarah, I would love to know, really from the beginning, like, when did you and Richard decide surrogacy was something that you wanted to do? And I would love to know, too, if you considered adoption, if you considered something else, or if you just always knew this was what you wanted to do.
Right. So, I mean, obviously, if you heard our previous episode, I'm a cancer survivor. I had a hysterectomy because of my treatment plan, and Richard and I were coming off of some really, really hard years. I mean, I didn't realize that was going to happen to me. He didn't sign up to have a sick wife, and we really both had to grieve the possibility of not growing our family and not giving Charlotte a sibling. Yeah. And when we got married, we had all those fun future conversations like, oh, we want 3 kids, or maybe 2 boys, 2 girls, like all those exciting things. Yeah. And when life takes a hard left, I think that Richard, obviously I wanted to be healed. Richard wanted, me to be healthy. And even though I was pronounced cancer-free, it doesn't take away the fact that you grieve that loss.
Yeah.
And just the possibility of having future children. At our age, I think that most of the time women get to make that decision for themselves. Like, you know what, this is our last baby, we're done. Let's put the bottles in the trash.
Right.
But when it's forced upon you, it's like, it's gut-wrenching at our age. And not to mention, I was blessed to have 1 baby. Charlotte is perfect, and, she's 3.5, and I'm so blessed. But also, I think about the women that, don't even haven't even had one,
right,
and you're struggling. So we had to really grieve that together, and we put the possibility of having a future, a second child, really out of the picture for the whole, first year post-treatment for me, because we were really focused on getting me healthy, getting me my strength back.
Yeah.
But we were really prayerful, and I think the surrogacy thing was always in the back of my mind because about a week before I was supposed to have a hysterectomy, my oncologist said, you know what, Sarah, I know you really want future children, and I tried my best to save your uterus, but your hysterectomy is only a partial hysterectomy. You'll still have your ovaries, so if you ever want to pursue surrogacy, we can discuss it. And that sentence just was in the back of my mind.
Like, it gave you hope.
It did. And while I thought that was so out of reach, and I couldn't even understand the science of that, that sentence plus you a year and a half before saying, Sarah, I'll have your babies. Not that I even thought you would ever be my surrogate, honestly and truly. But I think that was in the back of my mind, and Richard in the back of his mind, and we just decided to be prayerful about it. So I think we took 6 months to be just prayerful about it, and we just thought, why not pursue this and start asking the questions, and if God continues to open doors, then we'll step through them. Were you going to say something?
Yes, I do think Alex and I had the conversation before your hysterectomy, and I remember being in your kitchen here before, or maybe slightly after your hysterectomy, that I mentioned it again. And again, it was a very I know you're grieving. I don't want to just rush to the next thing. I didn't want you to not be able to grieve the loss of you having your baby and just jumping to me having your baby for you. So I didn't even know if it was the right place to bring it up again. But I do remember us casually having that conversation again around that time.
Yeah, and part of me is like, oh my God, that's so silly. Like,
Yeah.
Can you even imagine?
I mean, we were just so grateful that you were alive and that, you know, like...
Yeah, and Dr. Nick, my oncologist, I told her that. I was like, you know, that's great to hear, but I'm just trying to be healthy for my baby that's here, and that's all I care about.
It was like all we could think about at that time was like, okay...
Let's just get me healthy.
Let's just get Sarah better.
But to answer your question, and the last part of the question, Richard and I probably like 6 to 9 months post my last treatment where I was really starting to feel like myself again, we decided, okay, we're coming up on February, it's a new year, why not just make an appointment with Nashville Fertility and just see what our options are. So we had that initial appointment to say, I have my ovaries, can you look at them? You know, I'm 6 months out of treatment. Actually, I was 9 months out of treatment. Let's just see if egg retrieval is a possibility, because that's really the first step for surrogacy. I did mention adoption to Richard on a walk once. And because we take walks, it's like where we clear our head, and we just kind of casually chatted about it. And I mean, I think that adoption is a big thing that has to, it's such a calling. It's such a calling. And,
it is,
and while, you know, it definitely was an option, but I think we decided that surrogacy, we wanted to pursue that and then keep the door open. So we never talked to an adoption agency. I did talk to a foster to adopt agency just to kind of get all my options out there because I was curious, but we really focused on egg retrieval and surrogacy first. And we thought, you know, if we get a slammed, hard, closed door with surrogacy, then of course adoption is an incredible mission, and there's a lot of parents out there that it's such a calling. I think it's important that, you know, your husband or both spouses are on board with that calling, because it really is such a gift. So
you definitely have to be called to do it. I mean, even just from the outside, from the beginning and from being a part of it, we had a lot of open doors and options with surrogacy. So I also want to know, your first appointment was you had an initial appointment with your fertility clinic, and just to see if you guys were good candidates for egg retrieval, right? And we didn't really know if that was going to be you because you'd been through chemo, right? Want to give like an overview of that a little bit?
Right, because surrogacy wouldn't have been possible if we didn't have healthy eggs or a good biological embryo, right? So before I even, I think, mentioned to you that I was doing egg retrieval, or anybody, I was like, well, the first step is egg retrieval. And we had an initial ultrasound, and, you know, by the grace of God, like, everything was perfect. My ovaries were healthy looking. I had developed follicles, but I will say my body had been through so much. My fertility doctor, was pleasantly surprised knowing my medical history. But I think one ovary had like one follicle. So I was pretty much going on one super strong ovary.
It worked. We just needed one.
That's what she always said. She was like, we just need one. So. And
we're going to do another episode on our IVF process. So we're not going to go too far into the details for people who don't want to know about that. But
that'll be a long conversation. There's so much.
We are going to talk about surrogacy in a second. But I would love to know kind of one more thing that I know people wonder is, just from your perspective, what has been the hardest part, the most difficult part about seeing your baby grow in somebody else, preparing to not carry your baby? That must have been difficult, or must be currently difficult. Like, I got here today and I'm like in maternity pants, and Sarah was like, oh my gosh, okay, I'm 10 weeks, so it's definitely happening faster than it has been, but I can definitely see it. And so I want to know, like, where you are with that.
Well, it's funny. It's something that no one really asks. So, like, I appreciate when people are always like, how are you doing? Because everyone's super excited about this whole story. But it's like, you know, no one stops to say, like, how are you doing? So, I mean, when I was even going through treatment and I was scrolling through Instagram and seeing everybody's pregnancy announcements and everybody having their second and third kid, it's devastating, and it's heartbreaking, and you want to be happy for your friends, and you want to be happy for people, but, you know, I'm sitting there laying in bed, no hair, no uterus, knowing that, like, that is not a future that I'm going to ever have again, and it's heartbreaking. So there's good days and bad days, to answer your question. I am so thrilled that this is a possibility, that I actually get another biological child, and that you're willing to carry my baby. Is like, we are over the moon about that. And I think that outweighs any feeling that I have that I wouldn't carry my own. I mean, and you're my twin sister. I mean, you
get to see me grow, which is in a way nice, right? You're like in the day to day.
Yeah, you're like an extension of me. So I think it would be different if it was a stranger. But yeah, there's definitely some grief there. I would love to rock a bump and feel the kicks and all those things. But one thing I've learned about in life is that you roll with the punches, and you just try to have gratitude. So I'm just like,
I think that's the biggest thing right there.
Thrilled.
Is having perspective. It doesn't mean you can't grieve and you can't have hard days.
Yeah.
But if you stay there and you stay in those hard places, you miss some of the beauty.
Yeah. So anyway, but we will get into the whole IVF process and my egg retrieval and embryo creation and all the cool science of it, because this baby is coming here because of a lot of love, but also a little bit of science. So
a lot of science, yeah.
We'll get into that later. But I definitely want to talk about you as a surrogate, Cathey, because women listening to this who are looking for a surrogate, one, or two, wanting to be a surrogate themselves, are going to have a lot of questions.
I'm ready. What you got?
Let's talk about how did you prepare to start the surrogacy process in your mind and your heart, and how did you prepare mentally to take this leap to volunteer for me, or how are you still preparing emotionally and mentally as you're now officially a surrogate?
So, as I mentioned before, my career really and my passion is in like women's maternal health. And I love, hormone health and pregnancy and postpartum. And so I work with that, and I'm a dietitian and work with women in that area. So I had a lot of these like seeds planted even before you were sick, right? So like when I was pregnant with Sam, who's my son, he's almost 4. I was preparing for I was preparing for a unmedicated delivery, right? So I was like trying to really get my mind ready for his birth, and I was listening to birth stories. There's a podcast called The Birth Hour, and I was just listening to all these birth stories, and I listened. You remember? It was like
you
on
would tell
repeat.
me to listen when I was pregnant with Shar, because you were pregnant with Sam at the same time, and I was like, I'm good.
Yeah, Sarah was like, nah. But I listened to a story. I would walk and listen to these stories, and I was listening to a birth story about a sister-in-law who had her sister's baby as a surrogate or gestational carrier.
Right.
And I don't remember the exact details, but I remember bawling and being so moved. And this again, like before you were sick, right?
I was going to say, because I was pregnant, Charlotte was a healthy delivery.
Right. There was no reason that I should have been so moved.
I don't think I ever knew this.
Yeah, I know. I remember. So, I just feel like these little seeds were planted. And then Alex, my husband, he met a girl at his work, and she got up and shared her story that she was a cancer survivor, and her sister had her baby as a gestational carrier. So Alex and I both had these things.
I actually talked to her. I emailed her before I wanted her
Well, that's
advice.
important to say. Like, you connected with somebody who had a baby via family member.
But she was like a diamond in the rough.
She was.
And that's why we wanted to share this episode and talk about it, because I wish I had
resources.
I just didn't feel like she was like a diamond in the rough that had like been planted in our path, and I'm so glad that she was able to give me tidbits. But
well, I think that helped that Alex and I both had like, we didn't know anybody really who had been a surrogate or a gestational carrier, and we had both kind of these seeds planted. So when I mentioned it to him, he wasn't like, well, what's that? Like, he had known somebody who has had a baby that way. And so anyway, I had this seed planted, and I loved my birth with Samson. Clearly, my son, I did a lot of prep work of, it was really like a spiritual process of preparing for his birth. So I have a hard time with that 4th trimester and that baby stage. I know people love it, but I don't. So I was like, oh man, I would love to be pregnant again, but I really don't want another human to take care of. Like, I really don't. Because now that they're older, we're just like, I like them so much more, you
And
know? You've always loved them, but liking them grows as they become people who you can just, like, communicate with.
And I would say Alex feels the same.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he definitely feels the same. He's ready to schedule his vasectomy. Yeah. And I'm like, I literally cannot get pregnant, so why don't we... Anyway, that's another conversation. But anyway, so I love being pregnant, and so when you were sick, everything got put on the back burner. Our lives, so, you know, our focus was to, you know, be there for you, and I just felt this tug in my heart, really, of like, I don't know if this is what I should do, but I'm going to continue to do my own research. So I started doing research. I also connected with a girl we went to high school with who was the only other person I knew who had been a gestational carrier. So I talked to her on the phone. She was so candid and so honest with me. I just reached out to her on Facebook and we connected and talked on the phone. And she told me the ups and the downs and the hard parts and the great parts. And she's currently on her second journey.
That's wild. Is it her second or third surrogacy?
Her second. So we should get her on to talk.
We should interview her. Isn't it cool how God just like puts people in your path?
Yes.
Like I think about Alex. I'm like, for a husband to just be okay with having his wife pregnant for 9 months that's not his child. Like, let's be honest. There's some. I mean, you're in bed by
he
7.
had questions. He had reservations. But his initial response was, absolutely. I have questions. I have concerns. But he felt this openness that both of us felt, this peace that is only God-given, that said, well, let's just push forward and see what happens. So I started doing my own research. I listened to podcasts. I read books. I talked to people who had been surrogates. And I just started to say, like, okay, God, I'm going to look into what this would be for my family, what this would mean for my own kids. And we'll go from there.
Yeah, so this is a good intro into the next question for you and just kind of the process that we took as families. So fast forward, we had a healthy embryo and we were over the moon. We were, we actually did talk to an agency and it's not because I really knew we were going to use the agency. I just wanted to see what a professional who had
I mean, we didn't know anything. I didn't know anything.
We just knew nothing.
Yeah.
So I wanted to talk to a professional who did this for a living and hired surrogates for intended parents.
And I do think you guys were looking at agencies too because you wanted to give me an out. I remember after you had an embryo, you said, you know, this initial process of us looking into making sure you're a right surrogate, the screening process is expensive. So this is your out. No pressure. We have talked to agencies. You and Alex need to really make sure before we move forward that this is what you want to do.
So, and I was having a little bit of heartburn as your sister. I knew that there was a part of you that maybe wanted future children. And I didn't want to be that kind of like hammer on the, like a closed door for you that like, okay, I just wanted to get a professional's opinion. So that's why I talked to an agency. And I remember asking them specifically, I was like, so can you tell me what you look for in a surrogate, for a perfect surrogate for your intended parents? And she said on the phone to me, she said, well, we have incredible surrogates and we actually have surrogates that are on board with us that have done this 2 or 3 times. She was like, but what we look for is obviously a healthy person who passes all of the medical screening, but also, ironically, it's usually women, wives that, love being pregnant, but mothers who have children of their own. Maybe they have, 2 or 3 kids and they're done. And I asked her specifically, I was like, well, is it a make or break if they, want to have other children of their own? And she said, no. She said, we've actually had surrogates that have done the surrogacy process and ended up having children of their own after that. So
I will say though, it's advised though to be done for the most part because
legally, for legal reasons, in case something goes
wrong, right? With any pregnancy, there are risks, right? Of not being able to have your own after, right? Hemorrhaging or, there's risk. Pregnancy is a very physical, demanding, you like face death at the end, right? It's a lot. So they say it's advised to be done having your own. Emotionally, it's easier. And
but it's not a make
but
or
it's
break.
not a make it or break it. You're right. They do not eliminate you as a candidate if you're like, I'm not sure. And that's really where Alex and I were. We said, Alex is done. He's pretty much done. But I'm such a dreamer. I'm like, I don't want a baby now. I know my uterus is open for business. Mm-hmm. But I just, the finality of it was hard for me. So it was nice for them to say, you know, we've had people to go on. I will say also hormones, specifically IVF hormones, when you're doing the full shebang of all the shots and stuff, can cause secondary infertility. Yeah. So women who are fertile and had their own kids and then go through the process of IVF, it could impact their fertility later on.
Right.
So that's important. And I felt a kind of a sense of relief when we realized we did not have to do all that. Right. Our fertility clinic was very open with a more natural option. So I felt relieved by that. And I'm just praying that God either closes the door in my heart of being like, after I have this baby, I'm just being like, oh, I'm glad I don't have to do that anymore.
Right.
Or that Alex's heart is like, oh, maybe I'm open to it. But I'm going to wait for him. Because one thing I know about having 3 kids is that I'm going to have him 100% on board, you know?
Have the husband on board.
That's one thing I don't want to do.
But moral of the story, you don't have to not, I mean, women, surrogates do go on to have their own children after their surrogacy journey.
It's risky.
I would say, I mean, and you have 2 healthy babies of your own.
Mm-hmm, very happy. I'm very happy.
And also, they would never clear somebody who has never had a pregnancy before to be a surrogate.
Right. So I do actually have a list of things that you have to have on here, just in case people are interested in becoming a surrogate.
Okay.
So you do have to fall within a criteria. So we had 3 big things we had to get through first. So after you guys said, Cathey, are you sure? And Alex and I said, yes, this is on our heart. God knows this is the next thing for our family. What do we do? Yeah, first, we had a medical screening. Mm-hmm. Then we had psychological screening and counseling. And then we had legal. Those were the 3 big things we had to get through.
And that was something that when I was researching and we were like diving into it, I was like, we have to have counseling. You have
there
to
was
pass
a lot of
psych
things.
exams and all that stuff. But
it took us about we did it pretty quickly compared to other people. We probably did it within 4 months, all of the things.
Yeah, but your psych exam was much more extensive.
It was.
But talk about
the medical screening was first. The medical screening was first. Sarah and I went. My medical screening, we were probably at the fertility clinic for 4 hours. Mm-hmm. And to be considered a surrogate, you have to be within a healthy age range, right? Childbearing years, you have to be a healthy BMI, so body mass index. You can't be over. I think you can't be obese. You could maybe be overweight. And you cannot be underweight because your fertility is optimal when you're within normal range, right? And they don't want to create high risk pregnancies. No. So sometimes surrogates will have to lose weight or gain weight to be considered.
And you didn't have to.
No, I did put on a good 5 lbs in 2020.
We had some quarantine weight we were working with.
But I think it helped my fertility. I think it did.
When in doubt, eat.
When in doubt, eat some avocados.
Yes.
Eat some guac. Of course, they make sure you're a non-smoker and a non-drug user. Mm-hmm. They make sure you've had at least 1 prior successful pregnancy and that you had no complications with those pregnancies. I mentioned in the last episode that I had a pregnancy loss, actually 2, and that did not disqualify me because I had previous healthy pregnancies. Yeah. So unless you had like reoccurrent over and over and over miscarriages, I don't think it's an issue because when you're doing IVF, you're taking out a lot of the factors that often contribute to natural losses.
And your fertility clinic will guide you through all this. Seems like a lot of information. Like they will guide you through all of it. They will screen anyone that you are looking for. If you're an attendant parent, they will screen anybody.
But this is good. This is good. This is stuff I had to Google on my own, right? So they have to make sure that you're financially independent and that you're not a convicted felon. On the physical screen, they looked at my thyroid, my hormones. They did an ultrasound. They did an STD test, a drug screen, a physical exam. I mean, we were there for a really long time. Oh, Alex, my husband, also had to get his blood done.
Which
and remember, we were shocked.
I was like, poor Alex. Why?
No, he did okay. He used to like faint, but he actually.
I know, but I was like, what is that?
So
what does he have
I
to do with
asked.
anything?
Yeah, well, they actually, the only thing they tested him for is infectious diseases, things like Hep C and stuff like
AIDS.
that.
Yeah.
Right, and I think they're making sure that the environment that your gestational carrier, your surrogate is living in a good environment. So they make sure you're financially stable. They make sure your spouse doesn't have infectious diseases because that represents a healthy home environment.
Yeah, because
right?
let's be honest, there's probably some people out there that are like being like, oh, I could get paid to just grow this baby.
Right.
And they're in like not good environments.
Right, surrogates who work with agencies make some good money.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was the physical screening. It actually didn't take long. I think they called me a week later and said, all your blood work came back. Everything looks great. At that appointment, they gave me a packet of paperwork to fill out. I can't even remember what it was about, honestly, but they gave me a list of
Was it mental
vitamins
health?
to take.
Oh, right.
They did give us a lot of next step stuff. So the next step, after we finished all the physical screening, was the psychological exam. So I had to also do a psychological exam. I think it was 2 or 3 different.
You had a couple solo exams. They wanted to make sure you weren't gonna like run
away with your baby.
Little fires everywhere, like
Yeah.
run away.
Yeah. So
But
it was intense though. So we did a Zoom thing because it was 2020, which is a whole nother, I think we should talk about that. Like we were doing this in the middle
Can we have
of
a whole
COVID.
episode about life in 2020?
You know, it was tough for a lot of people who were doing IVF or surrogacy in the middle of that because some of these carriers were giving birth and the parents couldn't be in the
anything
room.
medical in 2020 was,
It was hard.
devastating. I mean, even
A lot
just
of people
that
had to
were
wait.
sick, just having to do things alone.
And a lot of IVF moms and dads who were just getting pregnant on their own had to delay transfer. And
I was
going
gonna
to
say they shut it down for a while. We were like we had some divine power over our journey because we just like got in the clear all the time.
And we were waiting during that period of like March, April, May, right? And that's kind of when you started your egg retrieval. When people were not, when they were closing down, we were just thinking and talking about it. Anyway, next we had our Zoom psychological exam. I think I took an hour or 2 test where they were like asking me all the questions about making sure I was sane, right? Yeah. So it was like, have you ever had anxiety?
Exam, right?
Have you ever, used illicit drugs, right? It's all of those questions.
What was your answer? Did you have anxiety?
Did I use illicit drugs?
I wasn't on the Zoom, I don't think.
No.
Did you ever sell drugs?
No,
but did you ever struggle with, and people are going to want to know, did you ever struggle with anxiety?
They told me.
You used to take Lexapro.
Yeah, I did. They told me answer as honestly as you can. If you answer perfectly, it actually shows poorly, like that you're trying to cover up things. So I answered all of the questions very honestly. And the good thing is it was like on a scale from 1 to 5. You could answer like, I have like least likely to or most likely to.
Oh, I see, yeah.
So, and then after that, the therapist met with me and we went over anything she had a question about. She even called me after and needed more clarification. And I was like, oh, did I make it?
Yeah.
Am I crazy?
She had like it's the same lady that did our group session, right?
It was different.
Oh, it was?
Yeah.
Oh.
So the lady
she
did
had
the
like a poker face. I was like, did I pass?
I know. No, this was a different lady. She had to do, this was different than counseling. This was like the psychological exam.
Gotcha.
Anyway, she asked me all the questions. And then me and her talked for an additional hour. And she asked me pretty much every hard thing in my life, how I handled it. It was hard. I was exhausted. She was like, so your dad died when you were young. Tell me more about that. Or you lost a baby. Tell me more about that. Or you have a twin sister. Tell me about that. Like, how was that hard? Like, and I was just like, okay, I just answered it like I would in therapy.
It's like counseling, right?
But it was like an hour of all the highs and lows in my life.
I'm like, I'm going to go take a nap now. I'm exhausted.
Oh, wow. It was hard. And Katie, the girl I talked to who had been a surrogate, she said that's a really hard. They will ask you, what happens if you're pregnant with Sarah's baby and you lose the baby? What happens? Like, how are you, like, they go through all the what ifs.
Will you carry guilt, shame?
Yeah.
How will you feel? Yeah.
So they go through all the what ifs.
So I guess you answered okay, because here we are.
Fast. Yeah, I mean, I think thankfully, like, we've been a family who communicates pretty openly. We've been a family who's pro-therapy. She said, have you ever been in therapy before?
Yeah, I was going to say, what if you struggled with depression in the past? Because let's be honest, so many people do. Like, are you, like, do they cross you off the list?
No,
or
they don't.
Do they just...
You can't be... It's, from my understanding, now, you can always clarify this with your doctor if you're wondering, but from my understanding, you can't be actively on certain medications for anxiety or depression. Of course, because some of them are contraindicated for pregnancy anyway, right? But some of them are okay with pregnancy, and if you pass this exam, the thing is, postpartum depression is real even if you're not bringing a baby home, right? So those are the things that I think they're trying to prepare for if you're struggling with this. They did ask me about my mental state after I had both my babies. And
did you have postpartum with Sam?
No. I struggled more with weaning depression with him, which is a thing.
I was going to say, I remember when he wasn't he like 6 months? Or
he was like 1, and I struggled when he was like 1.
Out in Thompson Station, yeah. I
yeah, but that was
kind of
also like
bluesy.
situational. You know, like there was a lot going on. Anna moved.
It wasn't like
I was very lonely, not working.
Yeah,
and I nursed him for a long time after that, but also he started to wean around then and eat more foods and all the things, and I think a lot of it had to do with the job. Anyway, so we talked about that. We talked about if we've been in therapy before. I think they just want you to be as honest and open as possible. Mm-hmm. And my recommendation is if you don't pass that exam, it's not meant to be, because being a surrogate is a very emotional, mental, you have to have a lot of mental strength.
I know.
And going through IVF is really hard, right? So it's a really important, actually I think every parent, what if every parent had to go through this type of screening? It would be, I got a lot of people wouldn't have babies, really.
Yeah. Well, our group, and then we had to do our group
counseling. So we had
group counseling sessions where they asked Richard and I, where we had, they talked to you guys as a couple, and then she, I don't know why I say they, it was one lady.
She talked to you guys, and then she talked to us.
And she talked to, I'm going off of what you just said about, they asked you about the scenario if you lost the baby. They asked Richard and I how we would feel if you lost the baby. Yeah. What we would do if, like, you know, far along in the pregnancy it wasn't viable. Right. Would we, you know, terminate or keep the baby? Right. Like, they asked us these crazy questions that, like, you know, if you delivered the baby and something went wrong, if all these questions that, you know, if something was wrong with baby at the 20-week ultrasound, like all these things that you just don't really think about, because all you're thinking is about is confirming a pregnancy. Yeah. And
also these are things you don't talk about when you're having a baby, just kind of in the conventional sense as well. Like, it's a lot of mental preparation.
It was exhausting. I was like, honestly, like, it was hard. I don't want to think about this. But it's funny because it's so non-conventional, but you're also drafting up a legal contract. So it's like, there's certain statements that have to go in there. Yeah. So I think honestly, the four of us, we had so many prior conversations about this journey, but it honestly forced us to have everything out on the table. Yeah. Which really and truly, I feel like is the only way to go. And I'm going to say this really quick before we talk about the legal. Yeah. You're my twin sister, and I think we have an advantage because we are so close, and our husbands were close in high school, and we're just like, the four of us are very connected anyway. But for somebody who is looking for a surrogate and, you know, going through an agency, it's okay, and it's still going to be a beautiful journey if you don't feel like as connected, or it doesn't have to be family. I actually have a friend in California who went through an agency, and she just had a baby boy in October. She actually talked to me on the phone and gave me a lot of good insight about her different, you know, experiences. But her advice when using, you know, I should say a stranger, because it really is a stranger, but just to feel like you have a bond and connection, because you really do. You have ultrasounds together, you have appointments together. I mean, you don't want them to be negligent. Like, you want them to take care of your baby, right? Like, they're growing your baby and giving it a safe home. So I think it's important to find that connection if it's not a family member. feel like you connect with that person.
And I think that's a lot what these therapy sessions were for. I mean, it was important for us to have these conversations, and especially if you're using somebody who is not family, it is really important to have these therapy sessions. So we did the psychological screening, I did, and then we had 3 sessions. We each couple had one separately, and then the 4 of us had one together. And then after we were cleared by the therapist, we went to legal, and legal was our very last step.
Yep.
Before we had the clear.
So me, as the attendant parent, worked with a lawyer that we got recommended through our fertility clinic. And I had about an hour-long conversation with her. She drafted up a contract. We had a conference call with her. And us, as the attendant parents, basically wrote the contract with our lawyer. After it was written, and it's all the basic stuff. I mean, I could go into detail, and I won't bore you with all the details of the contract, but obviously we talked about financial things we were going to cover. We did you talk about financial, a lot of people, you're going through an agency, you're going to pay, a lump sum, and that's going to include, like a stipend monthly for your surrogate. It can include, meds or, and Cathey and I are sisters. So we had kind of worked out, childcare, all the things
Sarah's giving me a little monthly stipend to make it easy on our family, like to get our house cleaned and extra food, and all of that actually is generally in contracts. Yeah,
so the financial piece will go in there. Little things like, I think it was funny, she asked me, if you want Cathey to eat or drink certain things, which is like so funny. I'm like, no, Cathey's good.
But it was in there anyway. There's like a blatant statement.
Yeah, and so we paid for that. We did that, and they sent it over to Cathey and Alex, because it needs to be both Cathey and her husband on board. And then at 20 weeks, we have to do another piece of the contract.
Right. They have to make sure that this baby is yours, right?
Yes.
Well, is that what they have to do? They have to make sure. Alex and I were on very strict terms of not to make our own baby during this time, because I'm on all the fertility meds, but they still have to make sure, right?
Yeah. Well, so the contract is basically that says you're having this baby, but it's ours,
your baby, right?
And we can take it home.
You're legally adopting it.
We haven't gotten there yet, because that's at the 20 week, but that will come later.
But yeah, the legal contract was a lot of things we talked about in counseling, so it was good. We had that in there, right? It said we're transferring only 1 embryo to Cathey, but she will carry twins if it splits, but we're only transferring 1 embryo. Like, they had so many details in there. So that took us about a month, right, to do the legal?
Yeah.
And then that was about it. After that, the fertility clinic gave us a clear, and then they said, okay, call us with your next cycle. And we'll get into that next, but we did a natural cycle, so we had to wait for my period to start before we could, get started on that cycle month. But they had ordered my meds, and then we went from there.
And the natural cycle, I feel like it was a little bit more sensitive, like really be on it. And I will say, like, I loved our nurses, but we had to, like, be super vocal about, when we were, like, I feel like we were like super to come bossy.
We were bossy. We'll talk about that. We were kind of bossy. But honestly, this is important. You kind of have to be bossy. You kind of have to be your own medical advocate. No matter what you're doing, whether you're a cancer patient or just a regular OB patient, it's okay.
I wanted to say, and I loved our nurse.
Right. We had a lot of great experiences.
But I wanted to say at one point, like, look, Cathey knows her body literally more than most people. Like, you have to trust us. We need to be here tomorrow. We need to have another ultrasound. We don't want to, we'll get into that later. But okay, so one of the last questions I want to know from your perspective, Cathey. We talked a little bit about me as the intended parent, but you as a surrogate, how does it feel to have a child growing inside you that is not your own? So it's so wild. And how do you feel about, after carrying him for 9 months and growing him, just giving him to me?
I know.
How do you feel about that?
I think that's actually the number one question I get from people so far.
Okay.
And I don't know if other surrogates will say the same thing.
What do they say? They just say, is it crazy?
How can you
it's
give
not
a baby
yours?
away? Is how
or
they
say, how can you give a baby away?
Yeah. Can you give a baby away? It's intense. And
Did Miney ask you that?
Yeah. Mom, Miney.
But did you say it's not mine?
Yeah, so I have a few answers to the question. Number one, giving this baby away is the entire point of the whole thing, right? Like,
right.
Literally, I'll cry thinking about it. Like, on the days that I think about birthing him and handing him to you, I literally just like boo-hoo. I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't wait. It's gonna be like the most incredible day of our entire lives. Like,
I literally cry thinking about it because I picture us in the delivery room and Dr. Samples, my OB, is the one that found my cancer.
Yeah.
And she's the one that's gonna deliver him. And you're giving, I mean, it's just like a full circle moment. There's gonna be so many people in that room that have been through this journey with us.
Yeah, so it's the point. The point of my heart doing this is the end result, which is passing him along. The second thing is that you know from the very beginning that, like, I've known from the very beginning that this baby is not mine. So I would say that it's something like what a foster parent would feel. I don't know. I've never been a foster parent, but I'm guessing that you love this child, you take care of this child, you adore this child, you do everything you can to make sure this child is okay, but you know that in the end he's not yours, that you have been given these months, this special time to bond and love and help and create, but that it's not yours in the long run, you know. And so it's just a really special thing. My heart feels very different in this pregnancy than it did with my own. My heart feels very connected to him. I know he is yours, you know? And so it's like I'm going through this process with you. I have a connection with him. I love him, but not like I did my own, like I do my nieces and nephews. It's really an incredible thing that I have the opportunity to do, and I think God gives us a lot of strength, you know?
But it's got to be a lot like, I think about women who get pregnant and they realize, like young women who realize that this is not a part of their plan. The responsibility is too much. They're young, and they make that hard decision to give the baby to a sweet family who maybe can't have children. It's probably a lot like that.
Well, I would love to compare myself to the strength of those women, but I don't think that I have that strength. I think it's different.
You're selling yourself short.
Yeah, well, I know exactly what you're saying.
It's just coming from somebody who medically cannot have any more children of their own.
Yeah.
I look at surrogates, I look at women giving their babies up for adoption, and it's such a sweet, incredible, like supernatural gift.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like takes supernatural strength.
It does. It's supernatural strength for sure. But because this whole time I've had such peace, like I don't have sadness or loss. I have only joy about giving him and like growing him. And I think that anybody wanting to be a gestational carrier or a surrogate, like that should be on the list, right? You have to be a person who kind of lives their life in service. I think Mom and Dad taught us that really well. And that's always on my heart. Like it's kind of like a ministry, right? It's like, how can I use something that I have and give and serve? And I think most surrogates have that in their heart.
I've noticed that Mom, when she's telling people about our story, and like people are like, oh my gosh, your girls are, it's an incredible story. I mean, Cathey's like, what a gift. And I've noticed that Mom has given that as an example. You know, this is Cathey's ministry. This is how she can serve her sister. And you know, if Sarah needed a kidney, she'd give her a kidney. She just needs a uterus. So I've heard her say that several times, and I think that it makes
sense to her for sure.
It clicks, because she can relate to that as a ministry, because that's how she lives her life too. But
so to wrap up, Sarah, I would love to know from you as an intended parent what advice you would give to other women who are struggling with fertility and considering other options and maybe even surrogacy.
Yeah, well, first of all, number one, somebody, a woman or a family struggling with fertility, or maybe given the bad news that, you can't carry children of your own. Number one, you're not alone. There is a whole community of hundreds of thousands of women out there that are also struggling. Don't feel like you have to walk alone. There's women to talk to. There's options. I would recommend getting great advice from a lot of sources. Don't feel overwhelmed by the science. There's going to be people and nurses and doctors that are going to take you step by step. I will say I was really overwhelmed. Surrogacy and IVF, even egg retrieval and embryo creation seemed so complicated. It seemed so confusing. It seemed so out of reach. And so I think just to not be overwhelmed, consider everything with a whole lot of prayer, and just find a good community of women to give you good advice. And probably number one, find a really good fertility clinic. I mean, you need people around you to kind of guide you and answer your questions and really handle your body with care. So I would choose your fertility clinic carefully and kind of just let God do the rest.
Yeah.
That's my advice.
It's good advice. I would chime in and also say to go into this journey with patience. It takes a while, right? I think, honestly, in IVF and in surrogacy and any part of this, the waiting is really hard. I think there's a lot of like, hurry up, we got to get the contract in, and then we wait. Or hurry up, let's get the eggs and embryos and let's wait. And so there's a lot of patience. I think if we go in knowing that it'll take a long time, the waiting is easier. And I think resilience, there's a lot of ups and downs. There's sometimes disappointments. And sometimes the medical side of it feels very sterile. So I think if you go in knowing sometimes these clinics and nurses and things call you with bad news and do not hold your hand. You know, and it's that's the hard part, right? So you got to surround yourself with people who will check on you and ask how you're doing and kind of be that person who helps you be resilient.
And I would just say, stay encouraged. Because
there's lots of good in it, and
it's so hard. Waiting is so hard. Patience is so hard. And especially when you see, I remember just seeing all these women who would just like sneeze and they were pregnant. You think, why is my journey so hard? You know, but patience is key. A whole lot of prayer, and just stay encouraged. Because
I think being
good things
present
come to those who wait. Not everything happens overnight, and everyone's journey is different. I would say my biggest thing is just you can't compare yourself to other people's journeys. Every motherhood journey is different. Every birth story is different.
That right there is good to end on.
Yes.
All right. Well, I think that's a wrap.
All right.
Thanks everybody for hanging in. This was a long one. We almost hit an hour. We could have kept talking too.
I know, we have so much to talk about.
We have so much
I
didn't address.
IVF sometime soon. Because that's a lot to talk about there. But thanks, guys.
All right. Bye, everybody.
This podcast is brought to you by Anchor. This is the platform that we use to record and produce our podcast. Guys, we are not tech savvy. I was so overwhelmed thinking about how to start a podcast, but we knew that it was the best and easiest way for us to share our story. And Anchor has been so easy to use and really intuitive for anyone, no matter how comfortable you are with podcasting or technology. They simplify it for you. So you can record your episodes, add music, activate sponsorship, and distribute your podcast to Apple, Spotify, and all other listening platforms, all through Anchor. So download the Anchor app for free or visit anchor.fm to get started. That's ANCHOR.FM to get started. Have fun.